All right, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. I have with me Fredie K, who's the founder and president of Suffrage 100 MA. Fredie K, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, could you please start by talking more about what Suffrage 100 MA is and what you guys do?
Thank you so much. And thanks again for having me. I'm honored to be here. Suffrage 100 MA, or Suffrage 100 Massachusetts, is a nonprofit that was started, as you mentioned, in 2010 to commemorate the 90th anniversary of women obtaining the vote with the 19th Amendment. We are very, very conscious, however, that the 19th Amendment included language which removed the barriers for voting, but other barriers existed in the country that prohibited many women from voting. African American women in the South were prohibited from voting by the Jim Crow laws. There were laws prohibiting Asian Americans from voting and Native Americans, and those also need to be addressed. And our feeling has been that this centennial of the 19th Amendment is an opportunity for us to appreciate and learn about our voting histories. We want to increase everyone's knowledge about this unbelievable movement of what it took to get the vote for women with the 19th Amendment. Which included, by the way, many people of color, many African American women, Asian women, also worked for the vote, and Native American women were working for the 19th Amendment only to face additional barriers after that. But so we want to raise these stories educationally, hold events, and so forth, and inspire people to vote. Voting is a key civil right. And I think it's very, first of all, it's your voice. Voting is our voices. Each of us have a voice, and that's our vote to affect the laws of the country and our government, because the people who we elect are writing those laws. The people who we elect are running our government. And so we get to choose who those people are through our vote.
What are some things we should keep in mind as we celebrate the centennial of women's right to vote in the United States?
Well, part of it, I think, it relates to what we just talked about, and that is voting rights is one piece of women's rights for everyone, and full rights for everyone. And so it means it's one critical element along the way. So we're still fighting for those rights. I'm talking about equal pay. And of course, amazingly, they talked about equal pay in 1848, way back when. Equal pay was an issue then. It is still an issue. Childcare, things that would enable all people in society to participate fully, means addressing things like childcare. The Equal Rights Amendment was drafted by Alice Paul and some others just after when the 19th Amendment was adopted in 1920. There was a woman named Alice Paul who was critical. She was a major player in obtaining the right to vote, along with thousands of others. And the Equal Rights Amendment was drafted and introduced in Congress in 1923, I believe. We are still fighting for the Equal Rights Amendment. It has just passed Virginia, the last state. It's not yet in the Constitution, and it needs to be. So I think as we celebrate the centennial of voting rights, and I include in that the 1965 Voting Rights Act, I think about all the people who worked for this, that there's still so much more work to do. And it's a call to action, if you will, for all of those things, including that we vote. I think that it has a lot to do with, like in many areas of society, women have either been excluded And when I talk about women, I talk about all women. And they've been excluded or forgotten or not given the limelight when they should. So we are unearthing, I think, knowing and learning historically that many women were creating, were composing, were acting, were doing things that we didn't know about. They didn't see the light of day. So this is a terrific opportunity, I think. The centennial helps with that, but when we're talking about civil rights issues, is that the arts can help illuminate that, I think can bring forward people whose work has not been told before, and make sure that we are awake to including works of people that have not historically been done and current artists, and make sure that current artists are included, all women of color and so forth, and that their contributions are highlighted and shown so that we can have the benefit of their genius. And until we all have civil rights, none of us have civil rights. So I think we all need to be aware that we have to fight for our friends, our neighbors, our families, our colleagues, and people we don't know who don't live in our spheres, unfortunately, if our spheres are not integrated as they should be. But to recognize that our country is lacking those civil rights, if any of us lack them, and that we have to be aware of that and understand that this will truly not be a free nation until we are all free. So we have to work together. One thing that I do want to be sure to highlight is the importance of LGBTQ+, and how we were very pleased in the film that we did recently in talking about the history of the suffrage movement, that we do also include in that movie a discussion about LGBTQ+, and the importance of that was to the movement and in terms of civil rights and moving forward. As we were talking about, that's obviously a really important part of the ongoing work for civil rights for all people. So that's something I wanted to be sure to highlight as well. So I will add that it would be wonderful if folks would go to our website, suffrage100ma.org. There is a lot to explore. In addition to our 200 nonpartisan nonprofit partners, and we're looking for more, please check that out. There are live links to each of those partner organizations. And we hope to continue to grow that. So please, on that page, there's a way that you can get information and even fill out a form. And please know we don't charge for organizations to become a partner at all. This is about information sharing.
Is voting an important civil right, and why? And kind of, I guess, in the follow-up from that, is voting the only important thing?
Is it the only important thing? Probably not the only important thing, but we know that it is important just by the fact that so many people were barred from being able to do it. Because there was an understanding that if everyone has the right to vote, then everyone has the same power, and it represents a certain amount of equality that people were not concerned with sharing. You know, the fact that I think in the beginning you had to own land in order to vote, right? Which also meant that if you did not have money, you were not considered important enough to vote. And obviously, if you're a woman or if you're a person of color, you could not vote. So it is important because it is a way to make change. And I know that it doesn't always feel that way, but my grandmother and my brother, he still works for the polls, but my brother's worked for the polls for 30 years. So I grew up in a house where voting was just, you have to vote, because it's not just your duty as a citizen, but you can't really, at least we were told, you can't really complain if you're not involved, right? So it is a way as an individual, and it's something that's unique because there are many people who wish they could have voted maybe 100 years ago, or could have voted even 50 years ago. And it is a way to help create the sort of country that you want to live in. And it's one of the strongest ways you can do that. Now, it isn't the only way, but I do think that voting represents a lot of things that work together. Having an understanding of who is running, what they're trying to do, what you want to have happen, which involves study. I think, and this may be my own personal view, but democracy came up through a culture, through the Greeks, with understanding that kind of individual wisdom and knowledge was also important. It wasn't just you vote because you have to vote. You vote because you are informed and you have a responsibility to help the community. And I think that being informed, and we can have different views, but we can only really have an important and fruitful discussion if both people are using facts to defend their position. And I think voting should represent the result of that research and potentially testing out of your ideas and saying, okay, since I've looked at this and this person thinks this way, I really do think that this is what I should do, because that is also part of the responsibility. I think voting isn't, and I fear that sometimes it's treated like voting for, I don't know, the most popular person in your class. That's not how it works. It doesn't have to be someone that you envision yourself having a drink with or dinner with. It's the person who you really think will do the best for the most people. And I think that's why I think voting on its own is important, but it has to be connected to being informed.
Sure. I think of it almost akin to like showing up to rehearsal prepared to play your part. And the vote is like starting to play.
Exactly.
But you don't show up to rehearsal. It's like, whatever, we'll see.
That's right. That's right. You walk in there like, I don't know, these names look nice, and then I'll just right. That's. I mean, you can do that.
Yeah.
But the reality is that the Greeks promote. I mean, most of the words we connect to knowledge, like philosophy, all of these, harmony, are connected to a culture where information was important and knowledge was important, and democracy was not separate from this idea that you should be well informed. So yeah, I like to think that my music and the music I like to listen to is transformative in some way. As I used to say, I like pieces where when I listen to them by other composers, like the hair on the back of my neck stands up a little bit, like it has an effect on me. And I think that has always been an issue in music of all cultures. Like, does it affect you? Doesn't mean that everything you listen to is necessarily, connected to. I was just talking about Webern and Berg and Opus 27 Webern, and every piece doesn't necessarily need all of that information for you to have a wonderful kind of response. But I think that every piece, if it's a dance piece, if it's just a really nice song, it has to have some effect. Like the creator has to create thinking about how his or her creation will affect the people who hear it, and not just they'll just take whatever I get. And I think that's connected to this issue of kind of responsibility. There are people, or to put it another way,
self-responsibility, right? And
what's that?
Self-responsibility in a sense, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has to be engaged in what they're doing. I remember someone, I can't remember who the composer was, but he was saying that he wrote this piece for string quartet, and the cello just played a drone, and the violins and the viola were doing all this interesting stuff. And his professor said, so that poor cellist had to drag their instrument across town to come and play this piece where all they did was that. And I thought, that's something to think about when you're writing music. And it could be something that's very simple and uninteresting, or something that's very difficult. But, making sure that your decisions are connected to the human experience in some way. And I can see that connection between writing music and also voting.
Absolutely.
So what you write should be, you should attempt to engage the people who come in contact with it, and you should have something you want to say, right?
Absolutely.
That means you have to think about it. It doesn't have to be, everything doesn't have to be, say, Beethoven's Ninth. It just has to be something that will, hopefully that you believe in. That's the other thing that came up today. I'm like, oh, I just threw some notes together. Like, that's not how it works. You never just throw them together. If you don't want to hear it, then I don't want to hear it, right? So you have to like what you're doing. And that's how to get more out of life anyway. If you're always doing things you like to do as opposed to what you expect to do, or people,
or what's expected of you,
or
right?
what is expected of you, exactly, then you'll get more out of it. But if you're making decisions based on what you think you should be doing, that's difficult.
Thank you so much. I'm like so excited to be able to feature your music on the program and to like be chatting with you.
Cool.
But yeah, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the event, or if Kristo told you anything about it. But the whole evening's trying to tell the story of voting rights in American history with music.
Right. Yeah. I believe that voting is an act of faith. I really do. And I also, and when I say faith, I don't mean that I know what's going to happen. And I mean, I don't know what's going to happen, but I have faith in the fact that I'm in the game. And that matters, and it may not matter in the ways that I'm going to be aware of tomorrow. And so voting to me is kind of an act of living life on life's terms. There are certain things I can control very clearly, and there's certain things that I can't. And so I try to that's what I mean about living life on life's terms. So I am, let's see here, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm willing to participate. And then I also accept what I'm not in control of. So that willingness is something I think is really, really important. And I don't want to judge anybody. But I choose to be willing myself.
Absolutely.
And I'm hoping that energy, can translate and everything. And so to me, voting is really truly an act of faith and courage and acceptance. That it's in that ballpark to me of living, but living life on life's terms is, I think, a really important thing to think about in one's life, and that can change what that means to you.
I feel like as a conductor, that's what conducting is like. When you go on the podium, there's only a certain amount you control, but at the concert, you don't make a bloody sound. And you have no idea what's going to happen. And, sometimes I literally just want to close my eyes before the first downbeat and just go, and just give it. Yeah. But you have to like completely put your vote into it in a very similar degree.
And like as a composer as well, for sure.
I'm sorry, what, Andrés?
I'm a composer as well, so I feel that as a composer as well in the concert hall, when a piece is like, at that point we've done all we can and we're just sitting there waiting to see what's going to happen.
The best we can do,
joyful glee.
The best we can do is make sure all of our accidentals are down, that we've done the best copy work we can in Alley or Jordan or whatever. I mean, that's when, and we have to be accountable. We have to take inventory of what we're doing. And you can't get all judgy about somebody else if you're not sure that you've taken care of everything at home the way. So, as a pianist, there's something really, really amazing about that, and that is, I have to accept whatever piano I've got in front of me, and I have to give, physiologically, have the same approach to any piano, whether or not I think it's a high quality piano or not. And I remember when I was working on technique in college and learning tone production and that kind of a thing with my teacher, he said, this is going to be your approach to every keyboard you ever are at, because that's your general approach. And so I have to accept the keyboard that comes with it, and some of them are tough. like if they have tough action.
Jerry, that reminds me of sorry not to interrupt you, but like literally living life on life's terms. You're allotted the keyboard that's in front of you, and you can. That's what you have to work with.
Yeah, and you know, as conductors, you've got a hull that you can either, I mean, it's either for or against you of what you're doing, and you know, and the same thing with a composer, and that is, you know, sometimes musicians have an easier time with your concept, and sometimes they don't have an easier time with your concept, and that's just, it just means what it is, you know, and so we just take those moments as they are. So again, just coming back to participating within our communities, you know, whether it's voting or if it's any other kind of a community act or something like that, I try to just stay calm and breathe, and you know, another phrase I think is important is, to thine own self be true. And so what I try to do is just clear my mind. It's like, what is my spirit telling me, and that's what I do, and I must, and I don't want other people to do that. If it's a totally different opinion of mine, that's great. Do it as long as it's according to who you are. I think that's really important. I think that's
Yeah.
Yeah.
When Andrés and I were talking about this just yesterday or the other day, like this idea of truth, both as an artist, but also in how you like speaking
like
the
as
truth.
a citizen.
Yeah, is so fundamental to being effective in the world and in your life.
Totally agree.
Yeah. And like one of the other things we were talking about with that is what you're referring to, that accountability, right? Like taking on that accountability as an individual in a community, but also the importance of hearing everybody's voices in the community. It's that kind of duality.
Yep. I agree. And look, I mean, look, this right here, again, this Zoom conference is a really good example. We've never met before, but here we've got, you know, three very distinct nationalities. Christos, I'm assuming you're Greek.
I'm Albanian, actually.
You're Albanian. I'm very sorry about that.
No,
Andrés,
well,
Andrés,
I got my name in Greece, so I.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that was just an assumption of mine, but there we go. But Andrés, what is your ethnicity?
I'm Mexican.
You're Mexican, okay. And so I'm Chickasaw and Irish. And so, I mean, look, I mean, totally ridiculously different backgrounds of existence, and yet we're able to, and you know, and on a daily life we've got different thoughts that we're not necessarily aware of with each other, but what we're able to do is to come together in a unified purpose. And how awesome, I mean, this is great. I want my son to know that this right here, we're at peace with each other. We come to each other with a lot of life preparation, but also a lot of, we just are throwing caution to the wind by getting on a Zoom conference and talking about it.
Well, I can already tell.
Well, hello there. My name is Cesar Alvarez. I am a proud enrolled member of the three affiliated tribes of the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation. I was born and raised in Western North Dakota on my reservation in Newtown, North Dakota, or just outside of Newtown. And I'm also half Hispanic. I'm very proud of both of my backgrounds. And I went to school here, lived in the rural community, a town of 2,000 people, and I ended up graduating from Newtown, and then I went on to Harvard University. From there, I worked in Washington, D.C. after I graduated for a few years for a national nonprofit, the National Congress of American Indians. And I moved back to North Dakota and came back to work for my tribe. And I've been enjoying it. I had a few different posts for my tribe since I've been home, largely though around intergovernmental affairs. So it's kind of the work, you know, part of the plan was to come home for a year, kind of help take care of my grandma. In being home, I ended up running for office, not part of my plan. And I got experience that I ran for the North Dakota House of Representatives for my legislative district, District 4, campaigning and just a deep dive experience into crash course into campaigning. I ran on the North Dakota Democratic NPL party side, and you know, we came just close. I lost by 310 votes, but who's counting? But definitely came up just short. Definitely kind of had a political landscape change in this part of the country in this part of so that really changed and brought in a whole bunch of new voters, and it changed the landscape. And so it came up just short, but it was really, and ever since I've just been involved still with political engagement, activism, and largely around voting too. And that's kind of what I do on my off time while I'm not working for my tribe during the daytime. And so that's what I've been enjoying. And so that's kind of what brings me here to this conversation, and enjoying just talking about those types of issues around this time of the year. The United States federal government and tribes have a very unique relationship. And one thing that I always talk about too is Native Americans, we are recognized all the way from the U.S. Constitution. And we've been here, of course, well before the founding of the United States. But when it comes to the United States itself in relationship with tribal governments and Native Americans, we are recognized and enshrined in the Constitution under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, which is the point that as Native American people and as tribes, we're not so much a racial minority group or ethnic group. We are a political minority, but we are a political class of citizens in the United States. But that relationship in the Constitution codifies, that trust relationship between the federal government by ceding lands from the tribes in exchange for certain services and rights, right, for these tribal governments and tribal people. That's the relationship. And so the federal government, they certainly took the land, but oftentimes they're not holding up to the other end of the bargain in terms of providing and ensuring, the types of programs and services that are promised in exchange for taking of these lands, because tribes were very self-sufficient communities and governing entities on their lands before this. And of course, when you took them and placed them on Indian reservations, a lot of times away from their traditional homelands, and often on very awful land, right? Not very arable, very barren, not the greatest lands, right? And put them in small clusters. It just took away a whole self-sufficiency, because we were the last group of citizens to vote, to be granted the right to vote in 1924, the Indian Citizenship Act. People don't realize that the first Americans were the last Americans to be granted the right to vote. So we haven't even reached 100 years since we've been citizens where we can vote. The arts are just an expression of the people. They're an expression of the zeitgeist of the moment, of the time. And I think they're critical. They're a critical component of a democracy, right? Of a civil society. If you don't have a thriving art, you don't have a thriving society. It's the expression, right? It's the expression of complex issues, of movements, of communities, and communities can express themselves, right? Express themselves even more effectively, I could argue, through music and through art than they could in a letter to the editor, or they could in a policy piece of legislation, right? I think you can more effectively express that through the arts. And that's kind of what I would say, is that's just how important, and they're just one and the same to me. It's hard to even argue how they have a conversation with each other, the art and politics or voting or what have you. They're one and the same. They're a mutual existence. They're interdependent in a democracy. So citizen is the most important role in our democracy. It's citizen, not president of the United States. It's not an elected office holder. It's citizen. We certainly outnumber. we just have to utilize that power we have more often. The one thing that is so tempting, I think, with everything going on in 2020, I mean, politics or otherwise, I think the one thing that is the most tempting to be is apathetic, right? To have apathy. But I also would say it's the one thing we have to fight. You have to vote, you have to be engaged, follow the issues, find your calling, find your issues you're passionate about. I think you just have to refocus and find constructive ways to be engaged, but always be finding ways to be constructive, not destructive. I think it's just so important to be in part of the conversation. Your perspective matters. Your views matter, your experience matters. No one else has had your experience but you. And so how are movements and how are policies going to change or cater more and work more towards your story if you don't share it?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.